High school football recruiting is still the lifeblood, and it is the talk of college football across the landscape right now because it is June. And if you're familiar, camps, official visits, so much has to be done in this month. And Mario Cristobal usually shines this time of year, no doubt about that. And he is certainly working the phone lines, also working, grinding, getting the job done, tracking all this. Brad Tejeda, CANES Insight is your destination, folks. This is a great time to get over there. If you've let it get away maybe for a few weeks or a couple months since maybe last football season, this is time to get reinvested because recruiting and then on into, let's see, ACC kickoff media days is like a month away. And then you're right into August camp. Basically, football season's here. Brad, what's going on today?
Yes, sir, Mark. You laid it out perfectly, right? We're getting closer and closer to opening kickoff, which is going to be right here in my backyard in Gainesville as Miami kicks it off against Florida, August 31st. I can't wait for that. I got a lot of big plans, events going on for that, man. But like you said, man, June has started, and as we know, June is gearing up for the big time recruits and official visits that have been gearing up week in and week out. And Miami fans, I know if you're new to recruiting, you're kind of wondering, hey, man, I'm new to recruiting. I'm following some of these recruits and they're committing elsewhere. I'm kind of worried about this team. Anyone who's followed recruiting like myself and knows what Mario Cristobal and what the staff does, it's June, guys. Relax. We got plenty of time. Let the loafers do the mile walks right now. And when it comes to August, September, December, we're going to start closing as long as we do what we can on the football field. But we've had some good visitors over the past weekend that we'll talk about, and a recent commit that we'll talk about as well. But it's great to be here as always.
Comments and questions are welcome, folks. So we appreciate your super chat contributions to support the channel as well. All right. Let's get started with the cornerback that was committed here just in the last 24 hours, Timothy Merritt, and your breakdown of his abilities.
Yeah, when you talk about Timothy Merritt, this is a kid from Alabama who visited this past weekend. This is a young man that played sophomore. His sophomore year, he played corner. His junior year, he played safety. Long, versatile, twitchy kid. Very athletic. A guy that could even play wide receiver if he wanted to. He's got that type of ball control and hands. But when you watch the film, I mean, this guy does it all. And then when you look at the offer sheet, this guy has offers from Florida State, Alabama. And we ended up beating out SEC schools like Tennessee, Arkansas, and Auburn. And the last corner, I believe, that did pretty well for the University of Miami out of the state of Alabama was a guy named Michael Jackson that did pretty good for us, ended up playing in the NFL a few years. So Timothy Merritt, this is a guy that Chevis Jackson started recruiting back at Marshall. Him getting on the visit this past weekend and kind of sealing the deal really shows that Chevis Jackson, if he puts his eye on a guy and he wants him, he's going to close on him. He's supposed to visit Tennessee this next upcoming weekend. We'll see if that still happens after his commitment. But again, the state of Alabama, right? I mean, I mentioned the guy Michael Jackson at corner, 6-7 years ago. But you got to also think you had Inez Cooper. When you look at the 24/7 Sports composite individual ranking of Timothy Merritt, guys who aren't following recruiting or kind of star oriented, they see the 3-star and they kind of, nod the head a little bit. But let's not forget, Inez Cooper from the state of Alabama was a 3-star prospect, and he is probably one of the best offensive linemen, not only on this football team, but in the country. And then when you talk about recently, right, in the last few months, Miami fans have been raving about 2 young men individually coming into this class from last year out of the state of Alabama, once again, and Cole McConaughey and Cameron Bobby Pruitt. So it's good to know that we're looking at the state of Alabama once again. We've already locked one guy in Timothy Merritt. There are 3 other potential targets in the state of Alabama that Miami's going after, and Zion Grady at defensive end. And then you got Eric Winters and Purcell as well, who are teammates that I believe both have visited Miami already. Georgia and a few other schools are in the mix. And again, Georgia is going to be a school that comes up a lot with a lot of these recruits that Miami's going after. And at the end of the day, that's a good sign because that means we're going up against the best of the best with obviously the college national champion in Georgia. So we're obviously evaluating talent and getting the right guys. It's going to be tough battles for some of these guys, as you've seen with some of these early targets that we're going to talk about later on. They've been crystal balled, to other schools. But again, it's June. Do your due diligence. We still got to play some football, and some of those things may change. But at the end of the day, Timothy Merritt out of Alabama was a great pickup, and I believe once it's all said and done, he'll be a 4-star prospect.
No big surprise here. Falconer TRX in the door first. We appreciate you being here, man. Thank you so much for the contribution. We can't ever shake Falconer TRX. We could show up at 3:00 in the morning. He'll probably be here. So thank you so much for that, Falconer. All right. Yeah, comments and questions are welcome. And we'll continue on the secondary. Of course, that is probably going into 2024. Possibly the weakest position, at least on paper, for this Miami team. Obviously, Timothy Merritt's not going to help this this coming fall. But in regards to any particular position, even though the list of targets is star-studded, extremely impressive, all over the place, is there a position that might be a little thin? Maybe not necessarily in terms of targets, but where you think the leans are headed and maybe in the wrong direction?
To begin with, Mark, you brought up the secondaries, right? And I think the secondary is a key position group to look at, not only because of, like you mentioned, we just haven't had the quality guys in the past, and currently just the depth is just not there. We don't have the amount of bodies that you would see at a top SEC program or some of the other teams that are competing for a national championship. We just don't have the quality bodies yet. A lot of the guys that we're bringing in are true freshmen, still need to be within the program for a year or two to really get there. But the secondary this year is going to be very similar to how Mario treated the offensive line class his first year, and of course the defensive line this past year. When you look at the secondary class very closely, we have a lot of local targets that Miami's going after. Just from the top, I mean, DJ Pickett is the obvious one, right? He's probably the #1 prospect on a lot of college boards, including Miami. He's going to be visiting Miami this upcoming weekend. He's also visiting Oregon at his last official visit weekend, which is going to be the other school to watch besides Miami. But I really like where Miami sits with DJ Pickett. This is a guy that is a legacy, Miami legacy. We already have family members currently on the team in Booker Pickett. And this is a young man that Miami has done their due diligence from beginning to end and has always shown love and been consistent throughout the recruiting process. And this is something that has not been done in the past, especially in past staffs before Mario Cristobal. But besides DJ Pickett, there are other names, especially in the wide receiver room, that are 5-star guys that Miami just has continued to recruit, even though they may not seem like the top contender. There's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that's required in recruiting to really make sure that you're in it in the long haul. And Miami really shot themselves in the foot before Mario got here. And it really seems like the more and longer Mario is here and the staff gets comfortable, you're starting to see that the relationships between a lot of these guys can really hit a switch once we start winning football games. But DJ Pickett is at the top of the list in the secondary. We talked about Timothy Merritt, who we just added on. But then you got Ben Hanks as well, another guy from Booker T. Washington who just visited Florida this past weekend. His father obviously played at Florida. He's a Florida legacy. This was a guy for, 4, 5, 6 months. Anybody who's followed recruiting like myself, everyone kind of, was wondering, why is Florida not the top school? Why is Florida not the top school? It's always been Miami, Miami, Miami. Well, after this past weekend, of course, Florida makes the pitch of, hey, you're a Florida legacy, kind of similar to Vernell Brown, kicking the tires on that and hoping some things gain some traction. But Ben Hanks is another guy from our backyard in Booker T. Washington that is one of probably the most skilled guys in the secondary in South Florida. I would probably put him up there right there with anybody in the nation. He's a guy that Miami's targeted at the top of the board from beginning to end. So look out for Ben Hanks as well. You also got Aiden Anding, who just visited Miami this past weekend, along with his younger brother, who we offered as well. So that's a good relationship that Miami is building. Look out for Aiden Anding. And Jabari Antoine, who is obviously an LSU commit, visited Miami this past weekend. That's another guy that Miami has continued to do their due diligence, even though he is committed to another top program. They're going to chop wood until he signs. Very similar to what happened last year with a young man out of IMG in the secondary in Robinson. So look for the Jabari Antoine saga recruitment to be very similar to that, and I think we have a very good shot. And Chris Ewald, again, we talk about guys in our backyard. This is a guy from Chaminade Madonna. It's going to be between Georgia and Miami. He already has a commitment date in line, and he's another young man that will be visiting Miami this upcoming weekend. So Chris Ewald is probably at the top of the list out of every position group as far as next possible commitments I would see. Is Chris Ewald. You also got Naeem Offord, Bryce Fitzgerald, Amari Wallace. You got Drake Stubbs, who's currently committed to USC, but again, another guy that Miami, Florida, and Florida State have been doing their due diligence, making sure they recruit from beginning to end. And that's a young man that I expect to decommit from USC and probably stay local in the state of Florida. So that'll be a battle between the three in-state schools. And then the two other guys I mentioned, and Andrew Purcell and Eric Winters, who are teammates from the state of Alabama who visited this past weekend. We're sitting pretty good with both of those guys. But again, Georgia, we're gonna hear Georgia a lot, not only with those guys, Elijah Griffin, who visited this past weekend as well. We're just going head-to-head with Georgia and some of these big dogs. And it just goes to show that Mario and the staff is really evaluating on the right guys. But your question at the end, after the secondary, who is that one position group where you're kind of, nodding your head or kind of trying to figure out where the numbers lie or who we may land? And honestly, as crazy as this may sound, it's the wide receiver group. Currently when you look at our wide receiver room, we're stacked. I would put our wide receiver room up against any ACC team with ease. And one of the top wide receiver rooms in the country, like you've seen on social media. We're ranked high for a reason. You bring in a guy like Sam Brown, who's at 800 plus yards, already been under Shannon Dawson's offense. You already have Jacoby George and Xavier Strepo in the mix. And then you got some young dogs that are just hungry, ready for their opportunity, like a Ray Joseph, like a Robbie Washington. And then you throw Elijah Arroyo and Elijah Lofton in the mix, and Shamar Kirk, who's a transfer from JUCO. Dude, we're hungry. We got guys that are ready to eat. And this is going to be the year where with Cam Ward, you're going to have to push the football down the football field. And a lot of these guys are going to get the opportunity to where it's going to be a lot easier down the road. Once we start playing football games, a lot of these wide receivers that we're in the mix for, whether it's Jamie French, Vernell Brown, Tyler Williams, Cortez Mills, Joshua Moore, those guys, a lot of those guys, especially the French and the Browns of the world, you got to wait till football games are played to where they could really see with their own eyes that we're going to be productive on the football field. Very similar to how some of the defensive line targets that we targeted in last cycle. We didn't really start to gain that momentum for guys like, Justin Scott and Marquise Lightfoot until games started being played. And they were able to see a guy like Ruben Bain be at the top of the top, not only on the football field on our team, but in the country as a true freshman. So it allowed these young guys that we were recruiting at that position group to see the opportunity for themselves. They have, as long as they believe that they have what it takes, we're going to put them in the opportunity to succeed. So we're going to have to do the same thing this year in the wide receiver room. And that's why you bring in a guy like Cam Ward. That's why you bring in a transfer like Sam Brown to really push that wide receiver room. So some of these guys, like a Jamie French, like a Vernell Brown, like a Cortez Mills and Dallas Wilson, those are your top 4 wide receiver targets this cycle. And unfortunately, some of those guys, you're not going to feel like they're 100% bought in or believe that Miami can really be that school until games are being played. So that's why I said from the beginning, it's just June. Let's wait till football games are being played, because this football season not only relies on recruiting this year, but it's going to rely a lot on Mario Cristobal's future and what a lot of the fan base really believe. This is his 3rd year. This is his time to shine. First game of the year against Florida, you got to win that rival game, and then you got a schedule set up to get to the ACC in Charlotte. So we're going to see what it takes. And a lot of these big time targets that we're going after, unfortunately, it's just going to be the waiting game. And that's just how recruiting goes, unfortunately.
About 60 to 70% of the views on these videos, folks, are from people that are not subscribed. So please subscribe. It's really easy. You just subscribe. It doesn't cost you a penny. In the meantime, Canes Insight with Brad and the crew over there every day with Miami football talk. And what's going to intrigue me, if this ever comes out where we know that the numbers are somewhat accurate, would be the NIL push. The NIL, not just from Miami, from everyone. Because as you were mentioning, these Georgia battles, these battles with the Bulldogs. And then, of course, as you mentioned, the upper crust of the SEC, Ohio State, Clemson, etc. we got to think that the majority of time, if the NIL works out in a particular school's favor by a considerable amount, that player is going to make the same kind of decision we would make. But I got to think much of the time it's a very close call. And a lot of student athletes aren't going to make a call based on $20,000. They're going to consider, okay, let's go to step two. What's step two? Well, I want to get developed for the NFL, or I like this school, or I like this location, or I like this coaching staff, or, these other factors come into play. When you mention Georgia, of course, they are the standard right now in college football in regards to a program. What do you think Mario's advantage is, or what he counters with throwing what Miami has to offer versus a Georgia or a Bama?
I think it just goes back to who Mario Cristobal is, right? It's the relationships, it's the honesty, it's being straightforward. These guys like Mario that he's added onto this staff, guys like Coach Nicholson, the linebacker coach. I mean, that's a coach that doesn't get enough praise. He's cut from a different cloth. Any recruit that talks to Coach Nicholson, these guys just bleed different, man. They're very straightforward. A lot of these bigger schools, especially like Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, they have enough blueprint, enough success on paper to where they don't have to continue this relationship week in, week out. They could kind of leave a guy alone for a month or two, especially if they're in their backyard, right? In the state of Georgia, in the state of Alabama. They could kind of leave that guy alone and kind of just let the logo and what they do on paper on the football field work itself. And then later on get back and say, hey, man, we haven't talked in a month or two, but as you can see, we're one of the best schools like always. Let's bring you in. Miami's not at that point yet, right? Miami has to do their due diligence. They have to be consistent week in, week out, not just on the football field, but from a recruiting aspect. And that's the strong suit of Mario Cristobal. That's the strong suit of some of the guys that he's brought in, like a Kevin Beard, like a Chevis Jackson. Chevis Jackson's doing a very good job as well. Jason Taylor, Coach Nicholson, like I mentioned. But at the end of the day, it comes down to winning football games. The NIL, the NIL is never going to go away, especially in the next 3-4 years. NIL is going to be there for the long haul. As you can see, the state of Florida, especially in high school football, has just passed the rule where NIL is now a thing in the state of Florida. So we talk about this frenzy that's happened in college football. It's going to be the same thing in high school football, especially in the state of Florida. And if you're from the state of Florida who follow high school football, you know exactly what's about to happen here. So it's going to be a frenzy and a free-for-all, right? So you have to make sure you do your due diligence as far as the recruiting aspect and communication, which Miami and Mario has always done well. But at the end of the day, it comes down to winning football games. And this is year 3 of Mario Cristobal at Miami. And this is the nitty-gritty, right? This is why you were hired. It takes a couple of years to build what you're needing to build. But as anyone that has been in the comments, as in the show, just talking about the Florida game, right? On paper, there's no questions asked. Miami has the better roster. But it's always been like that, right? When you go up against the Virginias and the Pittsburghs of the world, we've always had the better roster on paper. But what happens when the football gets snapped, right? What happens when coaching and strategies are in the mix? So this is the year 3, where Mario really has to get it done. Not just only for our football team in this season, but it's going to be heavy in recruiting as well, especially in the wide receiver room and the offensive line room groups, along with the secondary, like we mentioned, that are going to be key position groups to watch, that are really going to be heavily involved in how we do this football season. And it's not just us finally that believe that we're going to be something this year. It's the whole country, right? Everyone is buying in the stock of the University of Miami football program this year. And there's a reason why. And a lot of it has to do with Cam Ward.
Slim Shady Kane stopping by. Slim, we appreciate you being here, man. Seems to me quarterback recruiting has left something to be desired. Will we see that change in the future?
Well, when we're talking about this current class, right, I think Miami has been set on one guy and one guy only, and that's Luke Nickel, right? They haven't moved from it. They haven't budged from it, and that's a good sign. Luke Nickel has came out in recent interviews this past weekend, even though he took his official visit to Miami over the past weekend. There's still other schools like our rival in Florida State that are calling every other day, wanting this young man to at least visit or give him some type of acknowledgement. And he is all in at University of Miami, and we're all in on Luke Nickel. So that goes to show you that we're committed to one guy. So as far as the quarterback room, I don't think anything's going to move or shake. I think the only opportunity that's going to be there is probably another transfer portal quarterback. As we've seen in this day and age of college football, if you could strike while the iron's hot and you got the good pieces around you and you just bring in a quarterback that could kind of just fill in that gap and just be the controller of everything else, we're going to see if that actually works this year with Cam Ward, right? We're going all in with a quarterback and him who decided to not go into the NFL draft and decided to come to University of Miami. So we're doing just that. And if that works, like we're all hoping, then why not do it again next year and dive into the transfer portal and get another possible top quarterback? Because you're going to have all the pieces around you to do the exact same thing that we're trying to do this year, and that's get to the ACC championship, get into the college playoffs. So I think that's where the outlier lies as far as the opportunity at the quarterback position for the next year as far as recruiting aspect. I don't see any other targets in 2025 besides Luke Nickel for that reason. But when we talk about the next position group and the running back group, right, you already have a guy in Gerald Pringle Jr. from Armwood, who's one of the fastest players in the country, 100, 200 meter. But you had two young men at the running back position that visited last weekend, and Byron Lewis in our backyard in American Heritage, and Shakai Mills-Knight from Chattanooga, Tennessee, who I had the opportunity to interview for about 45 minutes. And between the two, to be quite honest with you, they're both in the mix to be that second running back. If I had to choose one right now, I'd probably go with Byron Lewis. It seemed like after he visited Miami, we've gained a lot of momentum from the traction that Florida State once had. And I like him being probably the second running back if he does end up being that guy. Shakai Mills-Knight has a lot of opportunity from other SEC programs like Georgia, like Ole Miss, like Tennessee in his backyard. This is a young man that was originally from Canada. His parents are from Jamaica. He's actually related to the great Usain Bolt, has the same track trainer as Usain Bolt. So this is a young man that has the burst, has the speed that Miami's looking for. And he's also 6'2", 215 pounds. He's got a lot of comparisons to a guy like Marshawn Lynch. If I had to think of a guy, even though he has the speed, and he told me that Coach Merritt pretty much texted him out of nowhere. And one of the things that really hit it off between the two that drew him into the University of Miami was just that he was a man of God. And Shakai Mills-Knight is the same way. And Miami was never in the picture before Coach Merritt became the running back coach at Miami. So that goes to show you that Coach Merritt is definitely doing his due diligence and going the distance for a guy like Shakai Mills-Knight, who has been pinned to other SEC programs, like I mentioned. And this is a young man that moved from Canada to Tennessee in July of 2023. He started out playing wide receiver and then realized, man, there's a lot more opportunity at running back, not only on the team I transferred to, but I have the body and the size to where I could get a lot more offers. And it's interesting, too, because when you look at his offer sheet, he has offers from pretty much every D1 program you could think of. But yet when you look at his overall ranking and his star, right, it doesn't equal up to the offers. But the three big key things that he told me that he's looking at for a school is great environment, just that gut feeling to when he's at an official visit, he feels like it's home, and just love from the community of where he's at. Those are the top three things he likes. Even though he did visit Miami over the past week, and like I mentioned, I like Byron Lewis over him. Probably right now, I think Shakai Mills-Knight ends up at an SEC school. But those are two guys to look out for in the running back room. And then, of course, tight end, we already locked in two guys in Brock Schott out of Indiana and my boy Luka Gilbert out of Ohio, who's a basketball guy. He's very diverse, has that grit. Another young man I was able to interview. He's 6'7", close to 6'8", 240 pounds. He could end up, pushing into offensive line if we wanted to, but this is a guy that's just a true football player. If Mario Cristobal had another son that we were recruiting right now as far as mentality, that's Luka Gilbert. And then Elias Williams was not only our top tight end target for us, but every other school. And again, Georgia, we bring up Georgia. He ended up committing to Georgia about a month or two ago. And then recently he shut down that recruitment. And I know Miami was probably the top school to try to steer him away from Georgia. So the fact that he shut down that recruitment, I think Brock Schott and Luka Gilbert are probably going to be your two tight ends this year, unless something crazy happens to Georgia. Wide receiver room, we talked about it earlier, right? You got Jamie French and Vernell Brown, who are the top two wide receivers in the state of Florida and in the country. These are two guys that are going to be official visiting Miami tomorrow, I believe. It's one of those midweek visits. I know Miami and other, fan base like to troll, oh, a midweek visit, midweek visits don't really go well, right? Well, guess what? One of the top offensive linemen on our football team, and Francis Mayoga, was a midweek visit, and we saw how that planned out, right? So you can never count those guys out. And again, I talked about it earlier. The fact that Mario and the staff, the due diligence that they do recruiting guys from beginning to end, week in and week out, even though these guys are crystal balled and pinned to Texas and Ohio State and LSU and Florida, Miami is not going to stop recruiting. And Jamie French and Vernell Brown Jr. are two prime examples that are guys that they have never slowed down or stopped the beat on those guys from beginning, and for reasons like this. And I think Jamie French is the guy to watch tomorrow. It seems like anytime Jamie French has visited a school, that was the new top school to beat, right? It was LSU, then it was Texas, and he's going to be visiting Miami tomorrow. So let's see what happens, in the world of social media and some of these recruiting insiders of how they feel Jamie French visit went with Miami. Vernell Brown, him and French just had those new NIL Adidas deals. They were, I believe, the first high school athletes to get NIL deals, especially in the state of Florida. So shout out to those two guys. But I think Vernell Brown will end up being Ohio State-Florida battle. He's also visiting tomorrow, like I mentioned, both South Florida Express guys. But then you also got Tyler Williams, who visited this past weekend. Dallas Wilson, who was supposed to visit this weekend, ended up going into OT7 instead. That's going to be a name to watch because I know Dallas Wilson, who's currently committed to Oregon, there's been a lot of buzz the last couple months as far as him trending in Miami's direction. But the fact that he didn't take this a visit that he was supposed to take, I watched that one very closely, along with Cortez Mills, who's been, pinned to a school like Clemson recently, had a recent visit to Clemson. And it seems like Clemson's the school to beat right now. But then again, Cortez Mills does have a visit to Miami June 21st. So between Cortez Mills, Dallas Wilson, even a guy like Joshua Moore from West Broward, who visited this past weekend, who I know Coach Kevin Beard really likes, I would look at Joshua Moore out of all the names that I just mentioned. He's the guy that I think Miami has pinned that they really like. And I think the relationship is very mutual. You also have another young man out of the state of Alabama, and Dalen Upshaw, who visited this past weekend, and Nashawn Montgomery, who's probably one of my favorite recruits, man. I'm a little mind-boggled. For the past few months, I've been mind-boggled. This is a young man who transferred from Rhode Island, the state of Rhode Island, transferred to Cardinal Newman in South Florida, has now transferred to Miami Central his senior year after he's already done great things at Cardinal Newman, has offers from all the great schools you could think of. Right now, it's a Florida-Penn State battle. But once his senior year's played at Miami Central, I'm hoping Miami gets back in the mix because this is a young man that really wants to be at Miami, but we just haven't really gave him the attention that we want, and he's doing his thing on and off the football field. Anybody that follows the 7-on-7 circuits, he's probably the top guy for Raw right now. Anytime they need a big-time play, Nashawn Montgomery, play after play is getting the big-time yards and touchdowns. So Nashawn Montgomery is another guy as well that I like personally. I don't know at Miami, but as far as skill positions on the offense side of the ball, that's kind of where we're at.
Tons of content to keep track of here at the Voice of College Football. So right now, just premiering over on the main channel when you get done here, ACC Power Rankings. We released our summer start to our Power Rankings throughout the week. We started with the ACC just released, so check out where Miami and the rest of the ACC, 17 schools, we got them power ranked over on the main channel. Also, as you see down there on the banner, so our Wednesday starts with Florida State live at 6, Miami live at 7. Then we're doing a deep dive on the ACC. So this is the deal. You guys know what the situation is with specifically Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina also kicking and screaming to get out of the conference. So we're going to have Tony Altimore on, take that deep dive to look at all the schools, their academic ranks, their all their metrics across the board. So join us for that, 8 p.m. Eastern time. It's going to be here on the Miami channel. As you see, ACC Deep Dive. Brad, what's going on at Canes Insight?
Man, honestly, just the best of the best content, man. We're week in and week out where we're interviewing guys currently on the football team, guys that just landed on the football team, whether it's Damian Martinez, Sam Brown, and others. We are one of the only platforms out there that are working hand in hand with Canes Connection, obviously, which is the NIL program for the University of Miami. And we're gonna keep up the beat, man. As we know, June, July, August is the knit and the grit of recruiting, and me, myself, Peter Rees, D Money, Steve-O, we're doing all we can to give Miami fans the best content each and every day. And as y'all know, you go to canesinsight.com, we have the biggest forum, pretty much minute by minute, second by second. Any rumors, any news you could think of is right there on Canes Insight. And we're one of the first platforms to have all the news that you need. We were the first platform to bring up Timothy Merritt as well before he committed to the University of Miami, along with other guys in the past. So make sure you watch out for Canes Insight, man. We're doing our thing, and we're going to continue to do our due diligence, just like Mario Cristobal and the staff. And offensive line wise, I know I talked about the skill positions on the offense side of the football, but I'm sure there are some fans in the comments that like those big beefy guys on the inside and defensive side of the football, right? When it comes to wins, it comes to the trenches, right? And as we know, Mario Cristobal, Alex Mirabal, they're one of the top coaches in the country when it comes to the offensive line. And it's very interesting, right? Because when you look at our current football roster, we're very confident in what we have in our offensive line room, whether it's 5 guys, whether it's 8 guys. We're starting to build that rotation and starting to build that quality depth where every guy in that position group, whether it's center, guard, tackle, we're starting to look a certain way, right? We're starting to have the physique, the build. You know, you got to be 6'6", 6'5", around 300 range. You got to be able to play guard, play tackle, play guard, play center. But when you look very closely currently, we're very tackle heavy. We got a lot of tackles, not enough interior guys that we can be really relied on consistency right now. A lot of it had to do with missing some guys in the past recruiting class, like a guy like Connor Liu. But I think this year it changes. When you look at this current recruiting class and 2025 class, specifically at offensive line, it's going to be very guard center heavy instead of tackle, which should help the University of Miami in the long run, right? When you look at the tackles, we got a decommitment of Lamar Williams out of Havana, Florida. And unfortunately, after they got to see him in person, after he committed, it's just not what they wanted as far as from a measurable, not really measurable standpoint, but just physique wise, didn't have enough weight on him. Also wasn't as quick feet. And you're looking at other guys like a Taekwon Mew from Neptune Beach, Florida, who is already committed in the class, who has very similar measurables and traits to Inez Cooper, who I mentioned earlier, who's probably one of the best offensive linemen on our football team. So I wouldn't discount that commitment, even though when you look at his 24/7 recruiting profile, it doesn't really fit the bill, right? But then you got to look at other guys. Jaden Wilkerson out of Orlando. I talked about the decommitment of Lamar Williams at tackle. Jaden Wilkerson from Orlando, who just transferred there to Edgewater, is a guy to really look after. He's 6'6", 330. So he's got similar measurables to the decommitment of Lamar Williams, but with a lot more size and weight on him, a guy that you don't have to really wait another year to be a product. And this is going to be the year for him to really prove that the competition he's going against is really his senior year. So that's a young man to look out for, Jaden Wilkerson. It seems like Miami has really done their part in making him feel like he's a top priority. You also have Cortez Smith out of Atlanta, Georgia. Again, we talk about this school, Georgia, who's the national champion, and he's right there in Georgia's backyard. He just visited Miami this past weekend. It was his 3rd time visiting, but the first time his family, I believe, was able to see Coral Gables campus, which again was another great sign for the University of Miami. When you look at this guy's tape, he's got the power, he's got the explosiveness. He's a guy that could play guard. He's a guy that can move into center if he wanted to. So like I mentioned before, guys that can be flexible and be interior guys. That's what Alex Mirabal is looking for, this interior offensive line class. So Cortez Smith is at the top of the list as far as offensive linemen I would look out for. You also got Sisu, the center out of Bishop Gorman, who's going to be visiting June 21st. He's probably the top target at center for the University of Miami. He's a guy that has a relationship with Joe Salavea and has been a guy that Miami has recruited from beginning to end. So that's another young man to watch. Max Buchanan out of Sanford, Florida, who's going to be visiting this upcoming weekend. He just visited Florida State, who seems like the team to beat right now. But until he visits Miami, I think Miami can really chop wood and really give him something to think about. When you turn on Max Buchanan's film, he's another guy where it's like, dude, I want this guy on my football team. He's nitty. He's gritty. He can be a guy that can play all over the football field, tackle, guard, center. He's flexible. He's got everything you want in a football player. He's got that it factor. He's a guy that could be a captain of the football team. And you need multiple guys like that on the offensive line. And another guy that comes to mind is Isaac Salles Jr., who I was able to interview, who's also going to be visiting Miami. He's going to be visiting Miami this upcoming weekend. He's committing July 18th, which is a big sign to where he already has a commitment date in place. He's out of Louisville, Kentucky. And, of course, some of the schools that are offering and in the mix is Kentucky, is Louisville, is NC State, which I believe is the dark horse between all the schools. I think NC State, Louisville, and Miami are going to be the teams to watch out for Isaac Salles. And this is a young man that his father played in the NFL. He was a 2004 fourth-round pick for the Cleveland Browns and played at the College of Indiana. He's been watching the game of football at the age of 5 years old. So Mario and Alex Mirabal, when they talk about just getting offensive linemen in the film room with them and being able to call out, defensive schemes and knowing exactly where you need to be, this is the guy in Isaac Salles that this is stuff that he does in his sleep. So I believe that relationship and the momentum of Miami and Isaac Salles is going to grow even bigger once he visits Miami this upcoming weekend. So he's another guy to watch out for. And he's also distant cousins, Mark, with Earl Campbell, out of all people, right? The great Earl Campbell. And Jalen Matthews and Zaire Addison were two other tackles that Miami were looking at. Zaire Addison just committed to USC today. And Jalen Matthews out of New Jersey is an offensive tackle that's committing, I believe, in the next few days. And Georgia, Miami, and Tennessee are his top three schools. I don't believe Miami is going to be the school for that. So like I mentioned, it's going to be more guard center heavy than tackle. But if I had to lay a name on a couple tackles, it's going to be probably Jaden Wilkerson.
Brad, to hate Kane's insight, Brad, as you were laying that out with all the positions, but especially the offensive line, I was thinking, okay, Mario Cristobal wants to get this roster and get this program to a point where you see at Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, et cetera, where the high school recruiting is where it needs to be. The transfer portal acquisitions are where they're supposed to be, where you're basically filling in gaps. You're using it as free agency NFL model. You've got the proof of concept in terms of developing high school blue chippers into excellent impact college players. So you got the development aspect covered there and the proof of concept to show the players. But then you also have the proof of concept of the development standpoint of making college players NFL value players, high draft picks, et cetera. And you cover all those bases. And it seems like it shouldn't be a big surprise that even though the condition of the offensive line was not in the best of shape when they showed up to take over this program, the offensive line position may be the closest to checking all those boxes than any position. And with the two really good players that they got, of course, Matt Lee coming in as a transfer UCF, he checks one of those boxes. Okay, boom, NFL. Mawanoa comes in, and of course, he's one of the best at his positions, and he's going to be, you would think, a pretty high NFL draft pick. That's the position where that's kind of the model that needs to be replicated at every position, both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I think offensive line is at the top of the list, like you mentioned. And I think the other group to really watch for this upcoming year is going to be the linebacker room. And it's crazy to say that because it's been a night and day situation in that linebacker room. I mean, I remember times when Corey Flagg was our only valuable linebacker, the only guy we could depend on, a 5'10", 5'11" at best on a good day linebacker who couldn't run sideline to sideline, but his football IQ and just demeanor for the football is really what helped him gravitate to just being a knack and being around every tackle possible. Now we have multiple guys that are like that, and they have the athleticism to run sideline to sideline, right? And I think this is going to be the year where, besides offensive line, I think linebacker room could really be that next position group that could really take that step and say, hey, you know what? We may not have many targets this upcoming year. You know, you got a guy in Elijah Melendez who you currently have locked in at Miami. You got TJ Alford, who you're going to continue to recruit, even though he's committed to Ohio State. You got Zayden Walker, who shut down his commitment to Georgia. And then you got Gavin Nix from IMG, who recently visited this past weekend, who were doing a really good job of recruiting. And then you also got Jaden Perlette from Buford, Georgia. So when you really look realistic-wise, as far as guys that you're probably going to keep or land in this linebacker room, you're probably only going to land 2 guys in this linebacker class, which goes to show you the quality guys that you brought in prior class and what you believe they can do. I mean, all these guys are 6'3", 230-pound plus guys that could run sideline to sideline. I mean, you got the Popos, you got the Malik Bryants, you got, the Cameron Pruitts. You got guys all around the football where you're not just relying on a Kiko Mainoa anymore. You have other guys that you could throw in the mix, like a Wesley Basaint, that you can rely on. So this linebacker room will be very telling to watch, and a guy like Coach Derek Nicholson, who I've been given a lot of praise for. And I think, honestly, he's probably our most underrated coach on and off the football field on the staff. So this year will be telling as far as what we do with this linebacker room, because as far as from a recruiting aspect, that's one of the position groups I kind of circle. And from a number standpoint, we're really not in the mix for many guys. But then when you look at our current linebacker room, there's a reason why.
Brad Tejeda, Canes Insight. We appreciate Brad stopping by. Brad's amazing, does a ridiculously good job. And when he likens what they do at Canes Insight to what Mario Cristobal and his staff are doing on the recruiting trail, I totally get it. I see it. I have a little bit more insight into this because I do the YouTube grind. I've done the on-site grind. I know what the business is like, so I know exactly what he's talking about. They are grinding to make sure that they get the best interviews, that they get the latest information, that they make sure that the information's accurate. That doesn't mean that there aren't folks understanding there are fluid situations. So that doesn't mean that there's sometimes going to be information that's conveyed that changes. So understand that. But when it comes to intel, when it comes to interviews, when it comes to getting the latest information and getting it as accurate as possible, and then also, I tell you, I've checked out these interviews. They're really good when you can go right to the source and talk to players and coaches and players' families. It's just awesome stuff, Brad.
Absolutely, man. We do a very good job with relationships, very similar to how Mario and his staff does with recruiting, right? At the end of the day, you got to build relationships with these young men, and they know some of the things they tell us, we got to keep secrets, and other things we're able to, let it out there in the source and on social media. But at the end of the day, man, we're all about giving Canes fans and the college football community the best Miami Hurricanes football content there is.
Canes Insight, everyone, with Brad. Brad, we appreciate it, and thanks for making this happen.
Anytime, Mark.
All right, we'll stay on here for just a second because I want to get everyone set up for this week on the Voice of College Football. So again, we had ACC Power Rankings just released here in the last 45 minutes. They're over on the main channel. So 17 teams in the ACC. Check out the Power Rankings we delivered, and we're going to be posting Power Rankings per conference throughout the week on the Voice of College Football over on the national channel. Right here on Wednesday after the Florida State show. I know, boo, but on the Florida State show at 6 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday. Then we do our regular gig with Cam Underwood, State of the U, at 7 p.m. Then after that, at 8 o'clock Eastern, it's going to be on the Miami channel right here, also on Clemson, also on Florida State, an ACC deep dive with all the realignment, all the court battles, everything that's going on with the ACC and the conference being in upheaval. We're going to look at the main players in terms of Clemson, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina in particular. There's a lot of talk surrounding Virginia. They're a prime candidate to possibly go to the Big Ten as well. So you won't want to miss that. an ACC deep dive coming up Wednesday. We will turn that around probably at 8 o'clock, right after Canes Live. We might be a couple minutes after that by the time we get things set and ready to roll, but just after 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, Wednesday night, right here at the Voice of College Football. We appreciate you being here, folks. And now we will hear from our sponsor. Love what I do as a sports commentator. I have definitely been blessed. I enjoy my career. But I got to say, if I could turn back time, I would learn the business side of sports management, how to manage people, how to manage projects, how to manage situations. And then there's also those times in which you feel stuck in a job, stuck in a career, just feeling that there's a dead end and wondering and waiting, when is that break going to happen? Well, unfortunately, I got to tell you, that break is not coming unless you make it happen. Sports is your passion. You love it, you live it, you breathe it. Why not make your passion your career? Introducing Southern New Hampshire University, our sponsor. At SNHU, you will learn the business side of sports management principles, and how to gather and analyze data. This degree will help you prepare for a career as an athletic director, sports information director, marketing manager, and other exciting roles in the sports industry. You'll be able to tap into SNHU's network of graduates working in sports-related organizations. You'll also have the opportunity to take advantage of an internship or an experiential learning course within the field. Your courses are taught by faculty with real-world experience, so you'll have opportunities to connect with people in the industry. And when you graduate, SNHU will be right there to help you with your job search. SNHU is accredited, nonprofit, and has radically affordable tuition. SNHU was voted one of the country's most innovative universities by U.S. News & World Report. Just go to snhu.edu/VOCFB. The link's also in my description section down below to see if you qualify for SNHU's sports management program. You might be eligible for financial aid or have existing college credits that could fast-track your degree at SNHU. Click the link to get started. Your exciting sports management degree at SNHU awaits you. Do it now.